You probably hadn't heard of BYD or XPeng even just 5 years ago, but now one brand has made a name for itself in Australia while the other one really wants to. You've probably seen BYDs around, if not the Shark 6 Ute or the Seal Sedan, then maybe the Atto 3, which has been around for a few years now. But if I'm being completely honest, the first time I can recall seeing an XPeng on the road was from the driver's seat of one when I picked this thing up. Now, both those brands have a competitor in the hottest competition going around, the electric mid-size SUV segment. The Sealion 7 and the G6 are both here as rivals to the Tesla Model Y, with comparable specs but slightly lower prices. If you're a bit apprehensive about that particular brand, these two could end up on your shopping list. So let's find out if that's a good idea or maybe not. Alright, so both undercut the Model Y by a few big ones. The Sealion 7 is a $54,990 ask, while the XPeng G6 is $54,800, both before on roads. The best part is that while both sneak in at under $55K, they don't really skimp on features. Both of our competitors here come with big multimedia screens and driver displays, heated and vented front seats, heated rear seats, a large panoramic sunroof, wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, surround view cameras, and wireless phone chargers. Both also have an app for functions like remote unlocking and locking, finding your vehicle, checking its status, and various other functions. Both cars are so stacked with kit that there are only small differences in the spec. The Sealion 7, for example, has a head-up display where the XPeng doesn't. Its slightly larger 15.6-inch multimedia display can also rotate, while its seats and steering wheel are genuine leather. The XPeng G6 has a smaller 14.96-inch screen and a heated leather steering wheel, but its seats are synthetic leather. Unfortunately, sometimes electric car design seems like it was entirely determined in a wind tunnel. And while it seems like that might have been a little bit the case with the front of these cars, they do have some differences when it comes to their silhouettes and their design features. The G6 to start is almost egg-like in its smoothness, aside from that sort of narrow bar for the lights there and this little cluster down here, that lower bit at the front bumper too. It's all kind of one smooth surface all the way back, except for that little camera cluster between the front wheels and the side mirror there. There is a pretty nice looking light bar at the back as well, but really it does sort of take that whole egg-shaped smooth wind tunnel vibe and really run with it. It's a similar story inside as well. There's not a lot in terms of buttons or anything like that to break up that kind of minimalistic design, which is kind of a downside when you're actually in the car, but I'll come back to that later. In contrast, the BYD Sealion 7 has a bit more going on both inside and out. For a start, you've got these light clusters here, which incorporate both the DRLs and the headlights, and there's a fair bit more black plastic trim on the car instead of just painted bodywork. There's also some creases that sort of take some lines down the back of the car as well as across the top of the bonnet. You can't really see it because both the cars we've been given are black, but there is actually a fair bit more black plastic trim on the front of the Sealion 7, which gives it a little bit more of a distinct face than the XPeng. The inside of the Sealion 7 will also look more familiar to you if you haven't been inside a new car for a while, especially an electric car. They're sort of all trending towards that everything's on the big screen vibe, but there are actually a fair few buttons in there, and it doesn't look too cluttered either. Sometimes I feel like I sound a decade older when I say this, but the fact that there are actual physical buttons to control things here in this car, as well as a physical shifter for the gears, is such a welcome addition, especially when everything in every other car seems to be moving towards that big screen in the middle. Sure, it's a modernized, minimized version of it, but things like climate, some of the drive modes, things like the parking assist, stuff like that, even the media and volume controls are all sort of available down here, and it's easy to get to, it's clear, and it means that you don't get distracted by that big screen. The big screen itself is actually pretty good though. It's not as customizable as the one you get in the XPeng, which I'll get to in a minute, but it does let you swipe up from the bottom of the screen even if you're using Android Auto, so you don't have to navigate back out of everything to get to the shortcuts. And then there's also this, the party trick, which you do need to see. My dad would probably think that was very cool. But regardless of which way around the center screen is, you've at least got the driver display and a heads-up display in front of you, which means BYD is at least considering that you might not want all of your driving display information sitting over to your left. It's also pretty spacious in here. The Sealion 7 is more than 4.8 meters long, and that means my legs have plenty of space even in my driving position. There's also plenty of spaces to put things. There's a nice deep storage bin here. The door card has place for my water bottle, but it also fits in this little spot right here as well. There's a phone charger over here with a little vent to keep it cool, stop it from overheating. There's a storage space under that as well. Plus, when you get to the back seat, it gets even better. All right, so I'm 180 centimeters and it is properly palatial even for me back here. I feel like I'm sitting in a full-sized SUV. There's so much knee room. I've got to properly like move my feet forward to get under the seat in front of me. There's headroom deluxe. My shoulder is not going to touch the door. The armrests are in a nice comfy spot. Even this one here in the middle is at a nice height for me. So this little pop-out cup holder situation here, and it's even got its own little thin storage bit there. The seat that I'm sitting at is also adjustable forwards and backwards, so I can sit up a little bit more if I need to, or recline it back sort of for a road trip vibe. It's a pretty good space back here, and with that sunroof, it feels even more open and airy. Shoulder up here is maybe a little bit high. If you're a kid, sort of head height down here, you wouldn't really be able to look out the window, but I mean, for me as an adult, that's okay. The premium effort in this car is also visible even from the back seat. There's 2 speakers in the door just here in the back, plus the USB-A and USB-C ports in the back here are in a little pop-out sort of section so they can be hidden away when they're not being used. In the boot of the BYD, there's 500 litres of luggage space, which isn't incredible for a car of this size, but that is kind of something that compensates for the fact there's heaps of rear legroom. The floor of the boot is actually adjustable. You can drop that down a little bit to get a little bit more space. Plus under that, there's a fairly deep well for storing things like the charging cables and stuff like that. As well, the boot is electric and automatic. So here's that minimal interior in the G6 I was talking about before, and most of the things in here actually work pretty well. The ergonomics, the steering wheel is quite nice to hold, even though everything sort of does lean on being in this screen. It is pretty easy to work with, and I'll come back to that because I do need to point out one kind of unfortunate thing about this G6 in particular. And that is that on the day that I drove both cars back to back and did the photography, the multimedia screen and driver display were both quite laggy. In fact, they were sort of freezing to the point where I would take off from the lights and the speedo would seconds later still say 0 k's an hour, which is pretty dangerous. So it persisted, I pulled over and I hit a factory reset. Since that, it's been fine, literally no lag, but I feel like even if that's just this car, it's something to keep an eye out if you do happen to find yourself looking at buying an XPeng G6. Aside from the weird electronic gremlins though, the actual software and the way it operates is really easy to use. It's very customizable. You can put your own shortcuts that you want to use down the bottom, even things like the drive mode and temperature controls. You get like these sort of widget style things that you can basically lay out a screen that you might not even need to use submenus for. It's really cool, it's very good, and it sort of avoids the screen becoming a distraction as much as it possibly can. The other thing about this car is that the layout is, like I said, pretty sensible. It's pretty similar to the BYD, actually. You've got the cup holders here, quite a large storage bin, which is pretty deep. You've got the 2 little phone chargers here, you get an extra one over the BYD, and you get the storage space down here under that as well. There's also enough room in the cup holders for our CarsGuide standard size bottle, and there's enough room for that in the door card over here too. 2 other last things it does well, but maybe not quite as well as the BYD. Its seats are pretty comfortable. They're quite nice and soft. This sort of synthetic leather feels nice, but they're not quite as well bolstered as the BYD. The other thing is it has this nice big panoramic sunroof, which feels really airy in here, especially with the light colored interior, but there's no cover for it, no blind, so even on a cool day, it becomes a bit oveny in here. Massive downside if you love gimmicks, this screen doesn't rotate. So, you know, if you wanted a rotating screen, your options are really limited when it comes to which car you buy. Similar to the BYD though, the back seat of the G6 is pretty spacious. Doesn't feel quite as roomy, but there's ample knee room. My feet under the seat in front of me have heaps of space for my toes. I don't even have to put them under the seat in front of me though. There's plenty of floor room, headroom. There's even this nice soft bit on the side of the car for my shoulder if I happen to lean that way. There's also a couple of USB-C ports back here as well, and this armrest has this nice little pop-out cup holder rather than one that sort of takes up some of that elbow space too. Also, there's actually a pretty easily accessible seat for you to be able to adjust the backrest. So if you're on a long road trip, you can kind of settle in and pick yourself a pretty comfortable position. Behind the rear seats in the XPeng, there's 571 litres of boot space, which is a bit more than the BYD, but there's also 1374 litres when you put the rear seats down. There's also another little bit of storage under there as well for things like the charging cable, plus you've got this luggage cover here as well, and just like before, an electric tailgate. Both the BYD and XPeng have similar drivetrain setups, being single-motor, rear-wheel drive electric cars. Their figures go relatively toe-to-toe in the end, with the 230 kilowatt Sealion 7 being more powerful than the 190 kilowatt G6, but not as torquey, with 380 Nm to the G6's 440. The BYD is also heavier, so it takes a claimed 6.7 seconds to hit 100, while the XPeng takes 6.6. The most important part of any EV test, the range. The BYD Sealion has a claimed 482 km WLTP range, while the XPeng G6 falls shorter at 435 km. This comes mostly thanks to the BYD's bigger Blade battery at 84 kWh compared to the XPeng's 66 kWh unit. The BYD only chews through power at a slightly higher rate, a claimed 19.9 kWh per 100 Ks, versus the 17.5 kWh by the XPeng. But the XPeng charges at a higher rate. Its 215 kW DC charge rate has the BYD's 150 kW rate beaten, so it takes just 20 minutes to charge from 10 to 80%. BYD doesn't have a specified claimed charge time, but a bigger battery and a lower charge rate should result in a longer time. In positive news, there are no real major red flags when you're behind the wheel of either of these cars actually, but I'll start with the BYD. It's pretty easy to drive. Everything in here in terms of its ergonomics and the way you actually interact with the interior of the car are really nice while you're actually on the road. But in terms of the way the car behaves, there's only one thing that's maybe a slight downfall, and that's that the suspension feels a little bit stiff. You can feel that extra 200 kilos of curb weight in this car, and because of that, things like big bumps when you've especially got an uneven road surface don't quite settle or ride as smoothly as they do in the XPeng. Not that the XPeng's perfect, but in this car it's just a little bit more jolty and a little bit more uncomfortable. But it doesn't let big crashes through the suspension or anything like that, and it's got some nice adjustment in things like the steering as well, so you can choose a comfortable weight for yourself. It's also pretty good when it comes to things like its acceleration. It's not too binary in terms of the pedal feel, but you also get that nice urgency when you need it. It's a pretty big car, but doesn't really feel too huge until you need to put the brakes on when you might be coming into a corner a bit quick. There is just that weight behind it, but once you've kind of dialed yourself into the car, it's pretty easy to work with. After being in the BYD, the XPeng just feels a little bit softer and lighter, and not just because it is genuinely 200 kilos lighter. Its steering, I know you can adjust it, but it just has a little bit less feeling, and the suspension is possibly just a little bit more damped over some of the bigger bumps that you might come across on some pretty rough Australian roads. It's not necessarily a dynamic masterpiece, but like I said before, there are no red flags with this car, and it does handle some of those more uneven surfaces a little bit better than the BYD. It's not quite as quick, it's a little bit less powerful, but at the same time, it doesn't really affect the way that you drive it. It still has that same EV urgency that you sort of get out of anything that you can sort of access most of its torque immediately. Visibility is pretty good in this car for something with such a swooped back roof as well. And to be honest, I haven't really come across anything that in this car, aside from those little tech issues I was talking about before, that make it sort of hard to live with day to day. And like I said, since I reset those computers, they haven't been a problem anyway, so maybe that is just this car. Both cars have a 5-star rating from ANCAP, but the BYD has 9 airbags over the XPeng's 7. There are driver and passenger frontal, curtain, side chest, and center front airbags in each, but the BYD also features extra side airbags for rear passengers. Both also come with features like emergency braking at the front, rear, and for junctions, lane keep and departure warnings, driver monitoring, and speed alerts. For a full, detailed list of features, go to the written review at carsguide.com.au. In terms of the XPeng's safety stuff, it's actually sort of really out of the way. It's only ever sort of interrupted my drive if I've actually yawned, and it sort of just gives me that little notification that says, hey, you tired, do you need to pull over? Which is, probably not a bad thing to check in with. But things like the lane keep and stuff like that doesn't come on unless you turn it on, which is a big plus. And its collision warning hasn't really gone off in any false alarm situations, which is pretty good because then it stops it from being a boy who cried wolf situation. The BYD is probably a little bit more overzealous than the XPeng. Its collision warnings can be a little bit intrusive, I would probably say, and when you put the automatic cruise control on, the lane keep can just sort of nudge you back a little bit into the lane, maybe a little bit more than you actually need. But other than that, it's all pretty well sorted. BYD's 6-year warranty has a 150,000 kilometre limit and some terms and conditions, so best read the warranty booklet before making a decision. The brand also lists pricing costs for each service the Sealion 7 will need, each 12 months or 20,000 Ks, up to 120 months or 200,000 Ks. Servicing over that time totals $3,880, with most services being $165, but a couple cost as much as $731. Meanwhile, XPeng's 5-year or 120,000 kilometre warranty falls a little shorter, but there's coverage for 8 years or up to 160,000 Ks on the main battery, and other warranties for certain parts that sometimes aren't covered. Servicing is done at the same 12-month or 20,000 K intervals, but pricing is listed until 100,000 Ks or 60 months, and is $2,064 all up, $307 more expensive than the BYD over the same period. Both of these cars are very impressive for the price, and their build quality is better than Tesla was back when Teslas were proper expensive. I reckon in terms of driving dynamics today, the XPeng G6 just has the Sealion 7 beat, but I reckon in terms of most other things, including day-to-day livability, the way it looks and its driving range, the BYD comes out on top in this comparison. And it's not exactly daylight between first and second. The G6 is actually a pretty impressive first entry into the market by XPeng. So I wonder what the result will be when we're back here testing the next generations of these models in a few years' time.